For the South Carolina Democratic Party, election night 2014 was an eerie repeat of election night 2010. The party once again lost every statewide race and all but one congressional seat. I sat down with Antjuan Seawright, Deputy Director of the SC Senate Democratic Caucus, for a post-election wrap-up to get his perspective on the election results and his thoughts on the Democratic strategy moving forward. Once again, thank you for sitting down with me, man.
Always a pleasure, and thank you for what you do. You have been a constant voice, screaming from the mountaintop about the issues that are relevant, not just to our community, but to South Carolina. So let me first start out by saying thank you for what you do, because it's important for issues to be discussed and have a vehicle to discuss these issues, and the Minority Eye has been very, very valuable in doing so.
Well, I appreciate that. Let's get into it. I guess I want to start, and it's no secret that both of us are Democrats.
That's right.
So that's what I want to talk today about the state of our party.
Sure.
And I guess the first question I want to ask is, Governor Haley received more votes this time than she did last time. Senator Shaheen received less this time than he did last time. So my question is, did Haley become more popular, or did Shaheen become less popular?
Well, I think it's an interesting dynamic. Let me first start by congratulating Governor Haley and all the candidates who actually won elections or won re-elections just a few weeks ago. You know, a funny thing about elections, you learn a whole lot when you lose, but you don't really learn much when you win, because when you lose, you have the opportunity to look back in retrospect and see what you could have done differently or what could have changed, perhaps. You know, this election was like no other, and it wasn't just relevant to South Carolina. It was across the country. I mean, look at Illinois, the home of President Barack Obama. They lost the governor's race there. You look at Maryland, one of the bluest states in the country, the governor's race there, Anthony Brown lost. You look at places like Michigan, where it was a blue state, in the presidential election they lost. In Arkansas, where Mark Pryor is like the Kennedys of Arkansas, they lost. Massachusetts, I mean, all around the country, Kay Hagan in North Carolina, Mayor Landrieu in Louisiana, all around the country we've seen something happen that was really beyond South Carolina's control, and that was a referendum, in my opinion, against the policies and against President Obama. Whether we like it or not, that's what I believe happened in the races. When you look at turnout was down in South Carolina, down by 40%. Which was interesting because we had so much at stake in this election. When you think about Medicaid expansion, when you think about health care, when you think about infrastructure in the state, we had so much at stake, but people just, in particular Democrats, didn't find the need to come out and really lend their voice to the process. And as a result, we go back to more of the same, more of Nikki Haley, more of 300,000 working South Carolinians who won't have health care. More of some of the worst infrastructure here in the United States of America, right here in South Carolina. A broken education system. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. DSS falling apart. And that's because voters did not lend their voice to show their support for the candidate who had declared, not just once, but twice, that he was going to be the guy who would change these things.
Right. Well, let's talk about the politics of this thing for a minute. And I like to focus in on what I call the 4 P's.
Sure.
And that's going to be perception, policy, people, and party.
Yep.
What does it say? And I'm asking you, and of course this is your opinion. You're
Absolutely.
not officially speaking for the party, but as a young Democrat, and as part of the party leadership structure, which you are, what does this say to the party that majority of South Carolina did not receive the message from the top of the ticket?
Well, I think it's a couple of different dynamics. It says that in South Carolina, we have a small window of opportunity to get a message out. This election was all about the national election. It was all about the national parties. It was national Democrats versus national Republicans. And all you have to do is look at elections throughout the South, whether it's Georgia, whether it's Florida, whether it's Arkansas, Louisiana. This was about the national message. And so what it says to us as Democrats in South Carolina is we have to find issues that really connect to South Carolina voters and try to really defray ourselves as much as we can away from the national narrative. 75% of voters who went to the polls said the economy was the main issue that they voted on this time around. Well, regardless of what Nikki Haley or Governor Haley will admit to or not, the overall economy around the country is improving because of what President Obama is doing in Washington. But she somehow is taking credit for every job that may be announced, whether she recruited it or not. And so I think that played a role. Now, whether I agree with her politics or not, I don't, because I know how hard some of these local county people work to recruit job and industries in the county, and she shows up and cut ribbons and says she takes credit for it, which I don't think is good. But sometimes that narrative gets lost because the devil's always in the details.
Right. And
we don't read the details. We read the headline, but we don't read the fine print. And I think that was part of what has happened. From a people perspective, it's interesting. I never would have guessed that we would have seen this type of turnout for this election, because I know for sure the resources and the efforts that Democrats put into reaching their voters. I mean, there were some 320,000 registered Democratic voters who voted in 2008 and voted in 2012 who did not vote in 2010, and we spent so much time and so many resources just targeting those voters specifically. And so I don't think it was lack of resources. Somehow or another, people's interest in the political process has just diluted. I mean, there was great excitement in 2008 about this first African American president, the idea of doing something historic in this country. And then since then, you've kind of seen things die down, and we saw it pick back up in 2012 just a little bit, but in 2014 we went back down, and so it's this up and down scale that we continue to see. And I'm just hopeful that, at some point when the rubber meets the road, that people wake up and realize these midterms elections are even more important than the presidential election.
Right. Well, what does another loss like this, where you guys, the Democrats, we lost all the state offices, what effect does that have on the party leadership structure and your ability to recruit new candidates? I mean, can you go to a young person that's fresh out of law school who's got a bright future ahead of them and say, hey, why don't you get involved with this party? How does that help or affect recruitment?
I mean, if you pay attention and you evolve, you'll know that, timing is everything.
Right.
And the political pendulum swings this way, and it'll swing that way, and it'll swing this way, and it'll swing that way. Look, we were in this position before. In 2004, I mean, all hope was lost. All hope was lost for Democrats. And in 2006, we rebound. But to answer your question directly, I think young people who have an interest in the political process and want to be engaged and involved, they understand that the timing of this election was beyond South Carolina's control. And what we've seen happen in this election was beyond our control. But what we have to do, and you said in your questions, we have to catch people early. We have to recruit young, whether that's high school Democratic clubs, whether that's young Democrats on college campuses. Really, really engage those people early and find them a place in the party where they can be a part of the process. Because eventually those same young people, you and I were young Democrats together, I mean, those young people grow up. And they become professionals, and they have a stake in the game. They become taxpayers, and they want to be involved in the process. And we have to find a way to really get them engaged and involved, and keep them engaged and involved, even in non-election years.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because when I want to talk about party building and recruiting, especially young people. We have history.
Sure.
And I remember when I was deputy field director for the Hillary Clinton campaign. I never met you before, but I met you in Rock Hill, and you were just coming out of school, and I was offering you a job, but you had a difficulty with your school schedule. Yeah. And I did what I could to make it work to hire you and get you on board, because you were a young person that was talented, articulate, intelligent, and I looked at it not as filling a position on a campaign, but as an investment in the party. Absolutely. Bringing a young person in the party. Here you are today, CEO of Sunrise Communication, major player in the U.S. in the state Senate. Where is that recruitment and where's that investment in young Democrats at the state party structure?
Well, we need more Mike Bailey's. Some things are an investment, some things are an expense, and we need more Mike Bailey's who will invest in young people, whether it's a city council race, whether it's running for dog catcher, whether it's a school board race. We have to build our party infrastructure locally.
Right.
All politics are local. We've heard it been said millions of times. All politics are local, and so when we invest in local races, whether it's county council, sheriff, city council, school board, conservation, but all these positions, all these elected offices and appointed positions are available. We have to invest there because eventually those people will be the people who will run for state senate, run for the state house, run for governor, run for lieutenant governor, all these things, and I think that's where our focus has to be. And we really, as Democrats, we really have to put a focus back on rural South Carolina. Right. I mean, there was a time period in which Democrats were known to be the rural party. Whether you're black, white, rich, or poor, wherever you are, if you were in rural South Carolina, you were connected to the Democratic Party. And somehow or another, we have to take our message back to the rural streets. Go back to Swansea, go back to Dillon, go back to, Holly Hill, go back to all these places where rural voters are and get them engaged again and let them know they belong to the big tent party, the Democratic Party, and they have a seat at the table.
All right. Let's talk about race because you run just as much campaigns as I have, and
Sure.
In the southern election, any southern election, it's going to come down to race and religion. Mm-hmm. These are your two biggest stomping blocks
Sure.
here. The Democratic Party in South Carolina, it has a perception of being the black party. We are in desperate need of recruiting more white males. I know it's hard. It's hard for African American male, but that's what the party is in need of, and diversity. But when you look at, we used to be able to say to the Republicans, "You guys aren't diverse." But if you look at the structure of the Republican Party now, you have a historic election with Senator Tim Scott, first African American elected to the Senate since Reconstruction. You have Nikki Haley, a woman and a minority, that the top seat in the state. So how does the Democratic leadership fare as far as recruiting minorities and putting minorities in top positions?
Well, it's interesting you talk about race because I think to a certain degree, and this is just my own opinion, I think it played a big role in the 2010 and the 2014 midterms. 70 will be 30 any day of the week. What we've seen, not just in South Carolina, but across the country, particularly in the South, is we had African American turnout that sometimes reached presidential numbers, 29, 30% of the total population who voted. But whites came out 70%. And the ones who came out, they did not vote for the Democratic candidate. Now, there's so many things you can attest that to in a day, but I think that's a problem. And we've seen the last of Southern white Democrats elected in Congress when Congressman Barron lost in Georgia. And so we have a real problem when it comes to white Southern Democrats in the South, not just South Carolina, but in the South. And so we have to figure out a way to really bring those people back. But first we got to figure out what made them leave the party. We oftentimes hear some of these Southern whites say, I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me. Right. But what did the Democratic Party do to leave you? Is it because the Democratic Party elected President Barack Obama, the first African American president? Or is it more issue-driven? We have to figure those dynamics out because somehow or another we have to reconnect with those people. And then in some of our rural areas and some of our predominantly African American counties, we have to do a better job of recruiting white candidates, recruiting whites and making sure they have a voice at a table in some of our predominantly African American counties when it comes to population. And so overall, we as Democrats, we have to really look ourselves in the mirror. Michael Jackson says it best, you got to start with the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror. And that's what I did. I did that when I found out the election results on Tuesday night, and I said to myself, what can Antjuan do to make his state better? What can he do to make the South Carolina Democratic Party better? What can he do to make his own community better? And I think all of us who are Democrats and who believe in the big tent Democratic Party, we have to look ourselves in the mirror and do what we can individually to really change the dynamic of the conversation.
Okay. Going forward, what issues or what things have you learned Senate caucus Democrats, Democratic caucus in the Senate? What are some of the policies that you guys are going to be focused on, or some of the strategies that you may be putting in place going into 2015?
Well, I think our focus is going to be very simple. I mean, it's going to be about infrastructure. It's going to be about education. It's going to be about healthcare. It's going to be about the economy. It's going to be about women issues, making sure that, domestic violence, we find a way to deal with this issue that South Carolina continue to ranks at the top of. We got to figure out a way to make sure that women are paid equally for the same job as men in the state. We got to make sure we come up with a solution that will fix our crumbling infrastructure in the state. We have to figure out a way to work in a bipartisan manner to come to an agreement to figure out how we can make sure 300,000 working people in South Carolina get the health care they deserve and take the politics out of Medicaid expansion. We have to improve on our public education system, whether that's paying our teachers more and shrinking classroom size and making sure we really catch our kids early enough and continue to expand 4-year kindergarten in South Carolina. We have to make sure we really turn this economy around in South Carolina. Today, the unemployment numbers came out. Our unemployment rate is ticking up above the national average, and that's a continual trend over the past 3 or 4 months. And so we got to create jobs. We got to put our people back to work. And I think from a legislative standpoint, that's what we have to focus on as a Senate Democratic Caucus. I think that's what we have to focus on as Democrats as a whole, talking about the issues that matter to everyday South Carolinians. Because at the end of the day, these issues, they're not Democratic issues, they're not Republican issues, they're not white issues, they're not black issues, they're not poor people issues, they're not rich people issues, they're South Carolina issues. And if one of our brothers and sisters are out of work, then we all feel that in some way, shape, or form. If one person doesn't have health care in the state or access to health care, that impacts us all. If one child doesn't receive the best public education opportunity in our state, then that impacts us all in some way, shape, or form. And so we have to look at it from a big picture standpoint, I think, going forward.
Okay. Well, Antjuan, thank you for sitting down with us, and I will definitely be catching back up with you at the start of 2015
I look forward to talking about the legislative session. You and I had this conversation last year, and ironically, most of the things we talked about, the Senate Democratic Caucus agenda, we were actually able to get those things accomplished. So I'm looking forward to sitting down, really talking about what we see going into 2015, what will be the big issues in the state Senate.
Okay, thanks for sitting down.
Thank you, man.
We'll be checking with you.